The Heart of It.
Roy West kicking in towards the centre. Roy
A distinctly Tasmanian conversation.
I can feel what it will be like when Tassie plays his first game, and I just...
Lynch gathers, he's got loose men everywhere, but he decides to have a pump shot, and it's an absolute ripper! 200 goals for Peter Hudson. What a fantastic effort.
How did he do that? Bear kick finishes off in style.
Up towards half forward, Stewart flying over the top. Oh, pulled in a beautiful mark.
Well done from Scott. Afterwards, Shepard's got the first goal. Has it gone?
Nichols has had the big ruck with it. Oh! Croswell!
Hello and welcome to The Heart of It, a distinctly Tasmanian conversation. Tasmania's northwest coast has proven a fertile breeding ground for football champions over the years. Darryl Baldock, Alistair Lynch, Grant Birchall and Matthew Richardson are but a few. So what is it about this verdant part of the island with Bass Strait lapping at its front door that has led to such a production line of stars? There are few who know or are more passionate about coastal football than Max Brown. The man affectionately known as the Fox for his tactically astute football mind boasts an involvement in the game across the region that spans 5 decades. In this episode, Brown reflects on his journey from premiership-winning forward to decorated coach and his fond memories of coastal football's heyday.
I started in the back pocket, and after 27 games, Rod White, who's state fullback, and the coach at the time said, you need to probably try somewhere else. So then I went forward and played probably the last 170 odd games of my career as a forward.
How would you describe yourself as a player? You've seen a lot of players as a coach. What sort of a player were you?
I wasn't that good. I didn't have natural ability. I hung in there. I think that it was just the will to compete and try and keep my place in the side. I didn't get the ball much, so I had to be an accurate kick. So I suppose that is what I was renowned for not missing too many shots on goal, but that had to be in my repertoire because I didn't get the footy a lot. What
was your goal-kicking method? Did you have a routine, a set routine?
Yeah, I did, and I think it's something that in footy it's one thing that hasn't improved, and I think it's just such a simple routine. And a lot of players who have set shots get nervous. I think that's the greatest time to have a shot for goal, because you know you're not going to get tackled from behind. The play stopped. It's all in your hand. So it was just simply run in a straight line, pick out a stationary target from behind, run straight, drop it straight, made sure the left hand went first and the right hand stayed for as much control as possible, kick through the footy, and really if you do that you really can't go wrong. And that's why I just get annoyed with these players who run at angles or kick round corners. There's nothing easier in my opinion than a set shot for goal.
Premierships at Ulverston?
Yeah, well, I played in 1 and was lucky enough to coach 4, and I suppose I done my knee and spent a fortnight in Melbourne Hospital those days, and that probably was the end of the career. A bloke didn't come back from that. So coaching was an opportunity. The club said, would you coach the under-19s while you recovered from your knee? And I did, and had a couple of years there for a couple of flags, and 2 years later, a bloke ends up getting the coveted job in your own town, and then went on to have 3 different stints there for 12 years at Ulverston, but was lucky enough to coach in 7 grand finals, and they're all very special, even the ones that we lost. They're fond memories. And then the 4 years at Devonport was also another exciting time and challenging time of one's career.
Talk to me about the key pillars of that Ulverston side that you had that was so successful when you first got there as the senior coach.
Yeah, because I'd coached the under-19s, 2 and 3 years earlier, I brought those boys on, so I had a real big start. It was a young side and we were a local side. And the club record holder at Ulverston is Wayne Wing with 369 games. The first thing I did was replace him as captain, which wasn't probably the smartest move, but Wayne Wing was such a fantastic person. He gave me 100% support. We were underdogs that year in the finals, got beat by 41 points in a second semi by Scottsdale at York Park. 13 days later, because that game was of a Sunday, we went down to Burnie as the rank underdogs, and in an amazing first quarter of footy, when there was a lull in the crowd about 8 minutes in, and someone yelled out, "Come on, Ulverston, make a game of it," because the score was then 3 goals, Scottsdale, and we hadn't scored. But at quarter time, we were kicking to the Wynyard end, and people who know the coast would know that's the non-scoring end. We had 9-4-58. Scottsdale had 6 goals straight. So we was able to turn around a 41-point loss 13 days earlier into a 42-point underdog win. Just the fact that we had a local side, we had a young ruckman. I was fortunate enough that morning to get a phone call from the great John Kennedy. And our ruckman was a spindly type rucking against Peter Roosendale, a real household name in Tassie footy. And John Kennedy, I was fortunate enough to be given, a contact with him through another coastal identity in Barry Gossage. And John Kennedy rang me and said, "This is how you should play Roosendale." And that's something I'll never forget, and something I'm eternally grateful to Barry for, because we may not have employed those tactics had it not been for the great John Kennedy.
Do you remember what he suggested you should do?
Yeah, not play him close and run and jump at him and work off him, and varying things that we put into place. And certainly that day, Roosendale wasn't as dominant as people expected he may have been. But to be a local coach coaching a local team, we had one import, for want of a better word, in Jim Matheson, who's a household name in Tasmania. And I want to make reference to Jim because he travelled every Saturday and once a week from Queenstown to Hobart to train and play for North Hobart. Now, if you go on that road, the Lyell Highway, and you do it once, you don't want to do it certainly the next week. So what Jim Matheson did, and his commitment to footy, we got him at the end of his career from North Hobart. He was just the icing on the cake when he was the outsider and the rest of the team were locals.
So you had a few phases of coaching Ulverston. In that first successful phase, who were the standout players that you took charge of?
Yeah, a lot of people say Nathan Howard. Arthur Hodgson's the greatest player to play for Ulverston. He won a Carlton Best and Fairest, come from the gravel. Nathan Howard would be in the top 3 or 4. So when people ask me that question, it's Nathan Howard, Simon Walmsley, Darren Jones. They're 3 players that just stand out as locals that just played and were great servants for footy, not only at Ulverston but in the state.
You obviously always felt a really strong connection to Ulverston because you went back multiple times as coach, didn't you?
Yeah, I had a 5-year stint, then a 3-year stint, and then another 4-year stint. So I just consider myself very lucky to be given the opportunity. Growing up on a farm up at Preston with my brother, who ended up being a premiership captain under me in an undefeated year in 1993, we would just play cricket in the summer and kick the footy out in a paddock with made-up goalposts in the winter. That's where we learnt to kick on our wrong side of our body. To get to Ulverston in those days to even watch a game of footy was a rarity. When we did go there, we'd meet up with our colleagues from the Preston Primary School, the Wings that I referenced earlier, Guns Plains people, and we just flocked to the end that Ulverston were going to kick 2 in the first quarter. And so footy, there's not much else to do on a country farm. That they're not as big as they are now. They're just real basic farms with not a lot of income, not a lot to do. So footy and cricket, considering there were no computers at that time, it was, you were brought up on it and everyone did it.
Did you have footy heroes as a kid? Local footy heroes?
Without doubt, number 40 for Ulverston, Kevin Gollimani, an outstanding player who, had he have dedicated himself, could have been anything. And I wore number 10 because of Jack Aiken. So Gollimani in the 70s was the full forward, Jack Aiken was the centre half back. They were clearly not only my hero, but plenty of others in that era.
Talk to me about that era in terms of the opposition, and who were the fiercest opponents you came up against?
The fiercest opponent, without doubt, is Stephen Beaumont. Like, he terrified Ulverston. I refer to him as Cyclone Stephen. And I remember Gary Best, who broke his neck and then came back and won 3 Ulverston Best and Fairests and was in the team of the century. We were jogging on the spot in the sheds at West Park, Burnie, and Bestie whispered, "Have a look round this circle. 2 of us are not going to make it back today," because Bowie had cleaned up 2 the year before and probably 4 the year before that at Ulverston. So he was an exciting and brilliant player, Steve, the most awesome player that you could ever have the pleasure, if you call it, to play against. But there were so many. The Shepherds were outstanding. They were awesome. The Cooey side, you know, they had Baird and they had Maxie Deverell, and they had so many fine players. No wonder they're regarded as a great club in Tassie footy.
Tell me about your move to Devonport. Was that a natural progression that you'd coached Ulverston, and the next step for you was to go on and coach Devonport?
Well, I think so, because I think that it's, if I can use an analogy with the under-19s to the seniors, opportunity only knocks once. As I said, local. I really believe in life as a coach or a parent or a teacher, you should encourage anyone that you have an influence over to try their best. I think that's where we've failed as a society. I think that's where Tassie footy's failed. So it was always there if the opportunity arose. Never set out for it, but when it came, I was again forever grateful. I remember getting interviewed with by Tim Hess, Eddie Murdoch, and the late and great Darryl Baldock, and went into coaching Devonport in my first year, the first time, with one of my very best mates still in ex-Adelaide Crow, Wayne Wiedemann, and the impact he had on coastal and Tassie footy was wonderful as well.
Yeah, what was he like around the club?
The Weed is liked and loved everywhere you go. He's a quiet bloke. He's a country boy from Fish Creek. He went up to East Lakes. I think it was Andy Bennett, Tasmanian legend again, got him over to Woodville, West Torrens. The Weed is the same wherever he goes, and really, really down to earth and humble. And I remember going to his 50th birthday in Adelaide, and he could have had anyone and everyone in Adelaide. He had 2 Adelaide Crows players that were just borderline players, and for that, you've just got to take your hat off to him. He now lives in the Clare Valley, and he's just the same old Weed, and he will be in another 10 years.
He was the kind of player that made you want to go to the footy on the coast. Let's go and watch Devonport and Burnie play. Let's see what Wayne Wiedemann can do. Let's see what Wish Wilson will do. And German came through. There were all these great players playing on the coast in those teams at the time.
Oh, well, Goodwin and Wish Wilson, how many were they going to knock out before half time? I think they had a private challenge themselves. And then you go to the other players from the mainland, like Fabian Corelli, one of William Leach, but by gee, the coast had some really, really good players, and I applaud Devonport and Burnie, who have been knocked over the years. I applaud them for having the courage to nominate and go in state league, because they gave people on the northwest coast the opportunity to play at the best level. And in roster games for a long, sustained period of time in the 90s, the crowds to those Devonport and Burnie games would attract minimum of 4,000. And I remember one day in July at Burnie, we came out of the sheds, those same sheds that Gary Best spoke about, Stephen Beaumont, and Baldock, who said was our chairman of selectors, he said, "My word, there's a crowd here," and the crowd was 5,790. And that's, if you can attract that many to West Park in winter, I'd say there's a fair bit of interest in the footy, you're doing things right.
Because it was created by the rivalry partly, and the good games, and they'd always be very physical games. It was a big deal, wasn't it?
it was the hatred was there, and it wasn't fabricated. And the media and Tiger Dowling, the late, and I'm talking about using some great, but there's some great people in footy. And Tiger was a wonderful coastal person, and in his role as the advocate and supported by other media outlets, and not only in the print media but TV, it got the build up that got people talking about it, morning tea, or in the street, or when they're getting their newspaper to say, "Are you going to the footy this week?" And that's when footy. It was very attractable and very promotable, and it was just an exciting and wonderful product.
Yeah, it was. When you reflect on those Burnie-Devonport clashes, are there incidents, moments in games that immediately come flooding back to you, Max?
Oh, I think Ken Rainsford had an altercation with some of the Jackson boys, and I'm a great admirer of the Jackson triplets. I think they've done wonderfully well. I had the pleasure of coaching two of them at Ulverston, but I remember once the Jacksons and the Bournes and these type of people from Burnie, don't get me started, Ali, they had the wonderful ability, the under Devonport players' skins. Grant Gard was a player who played with both, and I think probably the biggest thing that was able to pull over Burnie involved an AFL triple best and fairest winner in Brady Rawlings. And the deal was he was playing for the Mariners, and Andrew Hill for Burnie was playing with the Mariners, and the rule was you couldn't play State League footy until the season was over. But on the last roster game, or the last game of the year, the Mariners played up at Ballarat. And I thought, we can test these rules. We'll play Rawlings on the Sunday. So I rang up Robert Shaw and told him what the intent was. And sure, he had to be a diplomat, because I wanted to make sure that Rawlings wasn't overtaxed. Flight home, trip back to Ballarat. And when Robert Shaw said to me, "Brownie, I think I might try him at full forward tomorrow," that was enough for me to say he's going to do the right thing. So we got to the game the next day. Burnie didn't know about it. We exposed Rawlings. He was 15. I remember Baldock saying, "If he's good enough, don't worry about his age." We beat Burnie out here at the Oval. That's the one thing that I can remember, because generally Burnie had some good wins against us at times, but that's one that we actually come out on top of our arch rivals.
You talk about Brady Rawlings. You had a few very talented young boys that you were coaching around that time. Who immediately comes to mind when you think of some of the talented players that you had under your tutelage?
That's a very good question. When I first started, a fellow kicked 3 goals in the first 10 minutes in the under-19 grand final by the name of Dion Scott. Like, he went on to make a wonderful career. Specifically, you could talk about the Rawlings. Daniel McAllister was a number 5 draft pick to Essendon, who I was fortunate enough to be involved with when I was assistant coach to Fags in the Mariners in 1996. But where do you start and where do you stop? There's so many of them, and I probably use Howard as an example. Howard could and should have played AFL footy. His outstanding record is as good as anyone's in Tasmania in the last 3 decades. His performance at VFL level was outstanding. There are a lot of players that you only just need the opportunity. I recall once with a great mate, John Beveridge, one of AFL's most revered recruiters, watching Jeremy Howe at Glenorchy. And Howard played in a Tassie side just earlier, and I said to John, and I was involved in that side, and I said, he can play. And we went and watched him at Glenorchy that day, and he did okay, he did better than okay. And I thought the Saints would take him. But for some reason, there's so many players to pick from in the draft, they didn't. And look at the career that Jeremy Howe has etched out. I saw Ian Callanan once at North Hobart at training. I wasn't involved that year, and I came away thinking that is the best footballer, skill-wise, I've ever seen. 55-metre left foot, right foot kicks onto the chest of someone, didn't have to move or change stride. But he never got his opportunity until late, and by going to Central Districts and then playing for the Crows. So some people get the opportunity, Some of those people don't take it, but there's a lot that are fairly stiff in the fact that they don't get the chance. But because there is such a big pool in a big country, I think if you get drafted, you should never ever underestimate or underplay that your name's been called out.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that in a moment, Max, but just to round out the Devonport conversation. So you had really good Devonport sides for a couple of years, didn't you? And you finished right up the pointy end of the ladder in statewide league seasons, but ultimately the finals didn't pan out the way you would have liked. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. I still go to bed, and I'll be first to admit it. I took full responsibility for every game that I coached and lost, because my expectation was that I would win every game, and I would come and analyse it. And you might have 2 hours of Saturday night where everything's great and the beers are flowing, they're going down nicely, but you get home at 8 or 9 o'clock and you start to the next week. And for that, I'll always think about 1997, but North Launceston went through the season unbeaten, so they must have been good. I alluded to a few moments ago, Rainsford had an altercation with the Jacksons and he got rubbed out, and in a second semi went at York Park where it was only 12 points down early in the last quarter, and I looked for Rainsford, but I knew he was behind my shoulder up in the grandstand. And then the next week we had to go and play Clarence on a Sunday at North Hobart. Now, playing Clarence anytime, anywhere is a tough gig. And we went down there and we picked a side that we thought would win. It rained heavily that night. Some of our guns didn't play anywhere near their capacity the next day, and we got beat. So that's an opportunity that slipped, and it's an opportunity that from time to time I go back and say, what did we do wrong and how much responsibility should I assume for that? But yep, there's plenty of moments in a career when people talk about playing and coaching in finals. There is no doubt that the satisfaction of coaching a team as opposed to playing in one, it's where you get the most satisfaction without question.
Right. You felt at that time you had a premiership-winning side.
Well, I thought we'd do very well, and yet we never. I think the cruelest thing in footy is to go out in a pre-final. A lot of people would disagree with that, but I would want to give my players the opportunity to experience the build-up to grand final week, irrespective of whatever level it is. The feeling, the training, the buzz, the decorations, the vibe around a town or a community leading up to grand final week is something that I would like my players to experience. So getting back to your question, going out 97 hurts because we never got that opportunity. And I suppose there's a lot of times before that, and certainly more after it, when a bloke drives down the Brooker Highway and you look over at the right at North Hobart and you say, if only, or maybe, or wouldn't it have been great? But those days are gone. So in life, you only get one opportunity and you've got to grab that with both hands.
What was your coaching philosophy, Max? They called you the Fox. You had a reputation for being able to make a decision that could change a game in certain circumstances. What was your philosophy as a coach?
Don't die wondering. I mean, if it got to a stage where we're going nowhere, and I'd rather get beat by 40 points and try something than just let it amble out. So I think that's the key thing. I think it's just knowing the opposition, preparing your side, understanding that you're representing, understanding that when you pull on a footy jumper, it's not an individual sport. If you want to do that, go and play golf or tennis. Pull on a Guernsey and understand the meaning of representation and to get them to be in a team to realise what people gelling together can achieve. So I think that, as I said, it was fairly basic. The rules of footy I don't think will ever change. There's only three: get in front, win the ball, use the ball. The great Alan Jean said about recruiting a bloke, and I probably heard once or twice in that, can they play? Number 2, can they play in September? But number 3 is the big one, what's their character like? And I just went away from that once or twice, and that probably hurt because you dream of the bigger picture. But the comments of Alan Jeans are comments that I'll never ever forget.
So where you erred, it was occasions where you thought, all right, I'm just going to compromise on that character front because I think that's maybe the missing piece.
May get me over the line, but at the end of the day, I'll tell you, it won't, and it doesn't. And I touched on Andy Bennett. The greatest thing now, in the multiple times I've spoke to clubs since my retirement, but I rammed it home during my coaching, which was 360 fortunate times to be able to speak. Discipline is the key to success. So you can have all the talent in the world, but if you haven't got good discipline, you've got nothing. And I remember Paul Salmon once said on a video, if you haven't got passion, you've got nothing. So I reckon that I do get disappointed with some of these coaches that sit and look stone-faced for a whole game. I just don't know how they're getting the maximum. I think you've got to show emotion when it's there to be shown. And I think that if you can demonstrate you're passionate and you're there for the right reasons, I think you'll find that it's a great way to get some buy-in from your playing group.
Going back to Ian Callanan, who you mentioned before, he to me is the greatest example of why Tasmania needs an AFL team, because he should have played more than 200 AFL games and he played maybe 50. I
would have said 68 and it's probably 48, but it is, and the Tasmanian aspect of an AFL side, I hope that in my life that I'm never alive and witness GWS or Gold Coast winning a flag, because they've been given everything and Tasmania has been just simply ignored. They'll be right, she'll be right. We deserve this. We've been the poor relation. And if Tasmania can never unite over this issue, we'll never unite over anything. And I have said, I'm disappointed in my fellow Tasmanians for some of their attitudes. There is no reason why Tasmania should not have an AFL footy side when we've got state teams in a lot of other sports. And the idea of playing the games in Hobart, fine by me, because they're going to have 3 or 4 up at UTAS, fantastic opportunity. There will be so many Tasmanians will retain memberships of the clubs that they're so passionate about in Melbourne, and also purchase a Tassie membership. And as time goes on, those Victorian memberships, they'll drop off and they'll only have the one, and it'll be for Tassie. So it's a sad moment in the fact that it's too late and we've been ignored. And that's why I'm forever filthy on the AFL and their treatment of Tasmanian football. But by the same token, it's a joyous moment. There is only 18 other of these licences have been dished out to a powerful organisation that's taking our great game right round Australia, and finally we've got an opportunity to be there on centre stage.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be so special, and I think Tasmania's got a huge advantage. You talk about Gold Coast and GWS. What they don't have is a history. Tasmania's been a foundation football state, so automatically has this rich history to tap into.
And any function you go to, whether it be a reunion or a catch-up with people, the footy contingent are united as one, and they're great people. And I always said in footy clubs, forget about your own footy club. There are so many great people in opposition. You don't think of it at the time, but you meet so many great people through footy. And Another saying that I've used multiple times, and I can reference tennis great Arthur Ashe. He won a Wimbledon final, and he's dying of cancer in his hospital, and he said to his then 14-year-old daughter, he said, "Kamina, whatever you do in life, play at least 2 team sports, because they teach you about life." That's coming from a man who won the most prestigious tennis tournament in the world. He was advising his teenage daughter to play 2 team sports. And the benefits to the community and to the upbringing and to the fibre and fabric of people that play the game is only enhanced by their involvement.
The trickle-down effect, how important the trickle-down effect is from this beacon at the top, which is the aspirational thing. Kids can see it in their backyard now all the time. They don't have to travel to the mainland to see AFL players, and that then filters down to community level. How important is that, Max? And how real is that possibility?
Well, it's totally important. You know, the effects will flow. They'll flow through the community, to the wider community, to the males, the females, the young and the old. And it's something we as a state, something we can own, and something that we can be proud of, something we can say that we've got and we deserve.
Max, awesome chatting to you. A couple of quick questions before we wind things up, and these are short, quick-fire questions, so just whatever comes to the top of your mind. Who do you think, and I suspect I know the answer, the best Tasmanian footballer of all time? DJ Baldock, and you know, yes, I say it because I didn't have the pleasure of seeing him play. He came back in '69. You couldn't get into a change room. He was great. I'll say that I went to the St Kilda, their only Hall of Fame night, or their first one, I'm sorry, and when Ian Stewart, they said they're inducting, and they got to the last inductee, and there was one legend to go, one legend to be inducted. All the others were first-timers. When Ian Stewart gets up and says, and he won 3 Brownlows, when he said, "Darryl Baldock is the best player I've ever seen by a long way." And on that same night, when Alan Jean said, "Best centre-half forward, you can have this and you can have that and you can have Brereton's, no one beats Darryl Baldock." When those 2 people say that, I think I'm pretty well on a short price favourite. That validates things for you. Best player you coached in Tasmania?
Wiedemann would be up there. There was a fellow that played, and this Nathan Howard's up there, but there's going to be a fellow that played for Central Districts highly likely with Callan. He certainly played with Daniel Holm, who was the captain at the time. We know what happened there. His name was Kynan Ford, and he played in 2 premierships under Clarkson at Central Districts. We recruited him from Rosebery. He played 1 season for us. He had the most outstanding footy brain that I've ever said. He would lead away deliberately from taking his player away just because it gave another player an opportunity, a better opportunity to win the footy. But yeah, Wiedemann and Howard, Devonport, Ulverston, let's go that way. And Wiedemann said that Darren Jones did have as much natural talent as the great Darren Jarman. Now, Wiedemann played a lot of footy with Jarman. He played with Jones at Devonport. To have that said about you, gosh, I think that deserves mention.
Absolutely. Favourite football ground in Tasmania?
Favourite? Alistair. Oh, I think York Park. I think York Park, I call it. I think UTAS has got something about it. I think that when you walk over the Tamar River, you know you're going to the footy. I think Jim Bacon, and I haven't got too much interest in politics, but I think what he done was magnificent in the development phase of that facility. I think there's something special about UTAS Stadium.
All right, and who was the hardest player that you had to prepare to coach against in your coaching career?
Oh, they're all very hard. There was some outstanding players. Darby Shear of Launceston, he was the best kicker for goal that I've ever seen. How do you prepare? He could get the ball out of 55 metres out and it was still going to be a goal. So what do you say to your full-back? Take him up to the wing. He's not that dumb. He was a really difficult one that every time that Lonnie was next week, you'd think, well, we're going to give him 6 or 7 or whatever. It was just a matter of how many was he going to kick against us.
Yeah, played some decent footy for Tassie as well. Just rounding it off, Max, you're so passionate about the Northwest Coast. You've done so many great things for football here and broadly for Tasmanian football. What do you think sums up footy on the Northwest Coast in your mind? What makes Northwest Coast footy so special?
Oh, the location between the towns. It was the rivalry amongst the Devonport and East Devonport. Now, I mean, I don't want to go there. That might create a fight somewhere. Burnie Cooey, Ulverston Penguin, and then Latrobe would interact with that East Devonport and Devonport feeling, and Wynyard wouldn't see eye to Burnie or Cooey. So just because of the closeness of the towns was clearly the reason, in my opinion, for the passion. Like those days, transferring to another club was nearly a jailable offence. And that's what created feeling and pride and hatred and all the emotions, whether they be good or bad. But they were the great days.
One of Tasmanian football's sharpest minds, Max Brown, a Northwest Coast stalwart. His passion for the state, his beautiful part of it, and the role the game can play in communities is as strong as ever. If you enjoyed this episode of The Heart of It, remember to like and subscribe to the podcast. Previous episodes with the likes of Peter Hudson, Royce Hart and Jeremy Howe can be found wherever you get your podcasts or at tasmaniafc.com. I'm Alistair Nicholson. Thanks for listening.